Hello there. Today I have something pretty special to look through with you. This is called Österreich in erdkundlichen Tafelskizzen. You can see that this is a bit of an older book. It's still in quite a good condition, but it shows some signs of use. And what this translates to is basically these are blackboard sketches to use during lessons at school when you're learning geography of Austria. And I think what makes this so special is that it's from 1952. Es says here, die Tafelskizze ist eine wertvolle Lehrbehelf. Sie hat grundsätzlich aus dem Unterrichtsgespräch zu entstehen. Sie soll Erkenntnisse aus dem Unterrichtsgespräch festhalten und den Anstoß zu neuer Denkarbeit in der Klassengemeinschaft geben. So it says these are really useful additions to a lecture, and they should develop organically out of the lesson. It says here Unterrichtsgespräch, which sounds like the teacher and his or her pupils are sort of talking with each other and having a discussion. I don't know if that's necessarily true for the 1950s, but I might be wrong, and it might be a bit of a cliched image I have of the time. These sketches that we're going to look through are meant to help the teacher prepare for a lesson. It doesn't say whether they are for younger or older pupils. Basically, any teacher has to decide that for him or herself. It says you can just draw them on a blackboard, or you can also put them on a larger piece of paper and put them up in class so everyone can get back to it and memorize what they show. It also says here that there are some stamps that I think you can buy, but it's not quite clear what they are and where you get them. But that would be pretty cool. I'm going to keep my eye out for one of those. And again, this is from 1952, and it was published by the Österreichische Bundesverlag. So it was made specifically for schools. I'm guessing this is basically for the Austrian state. One little addition here, in 1952, Austria was still occupied by the Allied forces, so it was not yet an independent state. So this really is from a specific time in our history. And before we start looking through it, there's a little addition here that says Druckfehlerberichtigung. So there are some mistakes in the book, and rather than reprint the entire edition, they added this little note here on the different pages, the sketches, and the correction. You can see it's mostly just typos, like here it says instead of 980 meters, it should say 890. Things like that. So I think we can safely ignore that. Let's start with the first page. It says here Österreich 1, Größe, Form, Nachbarn. So this first page is on Austria in general, its size, form, and neighboring countries. I think most of you know what Austria looks like. I've shown you some maps a couple times. what's pretty cool about this book is that these sketches are all hand-drawn, and so Austria always looks a little differently. You can see it in this corner here. That I don't know if it was the same artist, but it's created differently. Even on the first page. I find that pretty charming. We can see the neighboring countries here. In the north we have Germany with a border of 784 kilometers. In the north we get to Czechoslovakia. The border is 548 kilometers. In the east we have Hungary with 366. In the south there is Yugoslavia, 311 kilometers. Then a little further west there's Italy, 430 kilometers, and finally Switzerland with 162. And Liechtenstein doesn't exist on this map, but they just completely left it out. Should be here in this corner. It's also been left out over here. I think this is a pretty interesting drawing of Central Europe as well. I really like this. It just gives you a quick idea of how to sketch that area. Here's some information on the rivers in Austria. And again, I think this is quite entertaining. Austria looking a little differently once again. And when we're looking at the Danube has its origin in Switzerland. Moves through an undisclosed country here, goes through Austria and then enters this white space again until we get here to the Danube Delta and the Black Sea, which again isn't spelled out but abbreviated sh. I don't know if this is necessarily easy to read if you aren't already familiar with large parts of Austrian geography. I do like maps like this one. It says here Gewässernetz, so all the different rivers running through Austria, where again you can nicely see that you get into the Alps here and the rivers are flowing away from the mountains. So Traun and Enns, are moving north to the Danube, but Mürz and Mur are flowing south, just like Möll, Drau and Gurk. Here we have the Salzach running through Salzburg, and the Inn, which I'm sure you're already familiar with. We recently had a look at the Inn Valley at the start of the year. I'm sure you remember. There's actually quite a lot of information about the Austrian climate, especially in the mountains. But very little historic information, which I guess makes sense since this is exclusively for geography. We have one little page here about the Austrian population. I thought it was a bit odd. if you look at this part here, it says 96% German, 4% other. And I don't know if this refers to the native language, which would surprise me, or what exactly the thought behind it is. We can also see here Vorarlberg and Lechtal, Schwaben. That will be this corner. And the rest of Austria, Bajuwan, so Bavarians. You can see it here. I assume that this refers to the dialect family. I've mentioned this before. In the most parts of Austria, we speak a Bavarian dialect. But in Vorarlberg and a small part of the Tyrol, people speak an Alemannic dialect, which is closer to Swiss German. But it's not common to refer to people as Schwaben or Bajuwan. This is a medieval group of people, basically, and it has no relation to our current times. We do also have these two references to Hungarians and Croatians. Both languages are spoken here. They are protected minority languages in Burgenland, and Slovenian is a protected language in Carinthia. Here we have some information about the infrastructure on roads and railway lines. You can see quite clearly, if we're looking at this one here, the connection east to west. So from Paris, runs through the Tyrol to Salzburg, and then basically along the Danube, Linz, Vienna, then across the border. PR here stands for Pressburg, which is an old German name for Bratislava. Then onwards to Budapest and all the way to Istanbul. The connection north-south is drawn here from Berlin, via Munich, again through the Tyrol to Venice, Bologna and Rome. So some of the most important connections are definitely here. We have an Autobahn, Salzburg, Linz, Amstetten, Wien. And we also have a rail line, Salzburg, Linz, Amstetten, Wien. One thing that to me also stands out, the second largest city in Austria is here, Graz, and the third largest is Linz. But there's no train that directly connects the two cities. And of course, I know it's a bit difficult with the mountains being in the way, but this is not an ideal connection, I have to say. You can take the car, which I guess is a bit faster during that time. But I don't know if it's necessarily more comfortable. So I have to be honest, I know very little about the trains in the 50s in Austria. What we have here then are the individual Bundesländer. Austria has 9 individual Länder, which often have a good deal of autonomy and a lot of importance too. And it starts here with Lower Austria, which also has the most pages dedicated to it. So My theory is that it was two people from Lower Austria who wrote this, but I might be wrong. Lower Austria lies along the Danube, in the north and to the east. Vienna would be here. Vienna used to be part of Lower Austria, but at this point it was already an independent part of Austria. It has 4 quarters, Waldviertel and Weinviertel, north of the Danube, and then 2 Viertel by the Wiener Wald, which is south of the Danube. Today they're called Industrieviertel and Mostviertel, but apparently that's a newer designation which didn't exist at the time. Again, there's some information on how the landscape's been created. About islands that used to be here, how the mountains rose out of the ocean, how some parts sank down under the ground. Quite a lot of information on the different kinds of stone you find there. A little bit about the area along the Danube. Interestingly, also a little bit about the area around Vienna, the Wiener Becken, which of course makes sense. There's also some oil that was found. But we're going to skip through this part, because we have quite a lot of pages we want to get through. This here is quite nice. We can see the mountains in Lower Austria that are often visited by people from Vienna. Particularly the Hohe Wand is great if you want to go climbing. You would be here. So here we have the Leiter, which is a river, and this is the connection towards Wiener Neustadt and then further north to Vienna. The Hohe Wand is really fascinating. It translates to high wall, and it really is basically a wall just coming out of a pretty much flat area. And when you're up there, it's like you enter a bit of a different world. You have the Schober, which is a very common name for mountains. And this here is the Schneeberg, which means snowy mountain. And I once noticed there's one underground station in Vienna, one that is above ground, that allows you to look exactly in this direction. It's set a little higher and you're basically looking out across the Danube. And when the weather's clear, you can see the peak of the Schneeberg in the distance. I was really excited by that. It was a beautiful and very surprising view. So here we have its height given as 2,075 meters. Right here we have Vienna along the Danube to Bratislava. And you can see that the traffic connections south are actually quite good in this area. Aspern, Ödenburg, Südbahn, this goes to Graz, Schneebergbahn. maybe one of the most impressive connections is the Semmeringbahn. I've mentioned this before when we talked about old train lines. It runs through a very mountainous area, which I think becomes quite clear from this little sketch. It's very, very beautiful. If you like old train lines, I do recommend visiting that one. Again, some information on the climate. I thought this was quite funny. This is the Danube Valley, Donautal. And here in the Wachau we have the Austrian Nizza, das österreichische Nizza. The climate's very mild here. This is where a lot of apricots are grown. And the area really is famous for it. But I think this part here is really fascinating. It says Hausformen, so different kinds of houses. So technically these are more kinds of farms. And while it's listed under Lower Austria, you can find them elsewhere in Austria too. This one here, for example, the Vierkanthof, is also very common in Upper Austria. I think I've mentioned this before. Vierkant just means it has 4 sides with a closed square in the center. And you have one part where you would live. This here, for example, would be the kitchen, die Stube, another Stube, so where you would sit down and eat. And then on the other sides you have the stables, Futterkammer, where you would keep the hay, and Scheune. These can be really impressive buildings, quite large. We also have the Hakenhof. So this would be one part here, and then the Scheune is set a little to the side. Zwerchhof is a little like a U shape. It says here, Wohnhaus ist Zwerch zur Straße, quer. So it means the part where you live runs parallel to the street. The Streckhof is an elongated form. You have the street here, and the front might appear quite narrow, but then once you enter the yard, it continues out into the back. This is quite common in the eastern parts of Austria. And a friend of mine said it's pretty great against the wind in the area, which can be a bit aggressive. So it provides a nice bit of protection in between the houses. We have a Dreiseithof, so one with 3 sides. This one also has an Obstgarten, some fruit trees in the back, and a double T. This is found specifically in the Ybbstal, the valley of the Ybbs, with the stable at the center. Now, this is also quite amusing to me. We're done with Lower Austria. Again, these were 12 pages just on Lower Austria. Here we get to Vienna, and we only have 2 pages. That's it. We learn what Vienna looks like, so people can recreate it in their sketchbooks. We find some information on the Danube, how it formed the landscape. So historically, the river came through here, through the Viennese mountains, and then you have many different branches. And with time, you have these sediments here. Because since the river spread out, it couldn't carry as much anymore. And as there were more and more sediments, the river began moving northeast. And created many new arms with time, and islands in between. You can nicely see this here, that the oldest part where we have these sediments is 260 meters high, the second one at 200 and the third one at 170 meters, and here, so in between the arms we are at 160. In the 1950s, the Danube was already regulated with the canal, but you're perfectly familiar with that one. And here's the Danube, so the actual river at the time. We also have the old Danube, which is not connected to it anymore. What we do not have is the new Danube, which would run in between here. Instead, we have an area that can get flooded. So this would be empty at the time. And there's some pictures from like the 60s and early 70s where people were using it as a beach. In the 70s, the Danube Island was built. So another way of regulating the Danube to protect the city from floods. And while we might not have a beach anymore along the Danube, we have more opportunities to go swimming and a nice island to go for walks. This was also the time before the underground was built. So in terms of railways, we have the Westbahn coming in to the Western train station, which at the time was basically the main one. We have the Südbahn, the southern line, to Belgrade and Rome, and the eastern line to Budapest and Sofia. This today is the new main train station. We also have the Nordbahn and Nordwestbahn and the Franz Josefs Bahnhof. And we have these connections here, Vorortlinie, Verbindungsbahn. And you can go here, die Donauuferbahn. Today this is the U4 and this is the U6. So these two date from the 19th century. Next we have Upper Austria, which also lies along the Danube, but on the western side. Again we have 4 quarters, Mühlviertel in the north, Innviertel along the German border. This part was part of Bavaria for a while, and you can still hear that in the way people speak. Sounds a little different from the rest. You have the Hausruckviertel here in the center, and the Traunviertel over here. And most people would also recognize the Salzkammergut here in the south, which lies in the Kalkalpenzone. It's already quite mountainous here. And I think it's quite a nice area. It's quite flat in the center, but you have some elevations in the north and then the mountains in the south, and you can peek across basically half the Bundesland when you're in the north here, just north of the Danube. It's quite a view. Let's see what we have. So you get a lot of information again on the actual landscape, but as well as on the industry. So what we have here is Linz, Steyr, Wels, which are the 3 largest cities here. And in Steyr you have Stahl- und Eisenverarbeitung, Auto, Räder, Schule für Metallverarbeitung. So metalworks, iron, cars, tractors too. You have aluminum here, paper. This one's a bit odd, it says Wels right here, 37,000 tons, but I don't know of what, there's a comma. You have machines, paper, wood, glass. And then other places, glass, leather, and wood again. Of course, you have a nice connection here along the Westbahn, which would go along here to Salzburg. And good connections north, Eferding, Aschach, Haag, Ried, Passau, and from there you would move over into Germany. But you could also go south to Gmunden, for example, or the Selztal towards Graz. Here's some information on the Alps in Upper Austria. So here in the southern part, the Kalkalpen. So here we have Wolfganger Alpe with the Schafberg, 1780 meters. Höllengebirge with Höllenkogel, 1862. Grünauer Berge with Karsberg, 1743. Sengsengebirge with Hornock, 1961. Große Alpkogel, 1512. Weidhofener Voralpen, Steirer Voralpen, and the Traunstein, 1691 meters. The Traunstein is quite fascinating because while it might not be that high, it sits quite far to the north, relatively speaking, right next to a lake, the Traunsee. See where we have that right here? So it really stands out in the landscape. We also have the Attersee. If you've been here for a long time, you might remember that I did a video about Gustav Klimt and told you that he painted the Attersee, and it's one of my favorite paintings. Then we have the Mondsee, Ersee, Fuschelsee, Wolfgangsee, and Hallstätter See. All of these lakes were built by a glacier, the Traungletscher. It first collected here in the area of the Hallstätter Sees, coming down from the Dachstein, and then split in two. One part moved north and then created the Traunsee. One part moved east to create the Wolfgangsee and then split up again. So the Fuschelsee and Mondsee, and then we have another split for Attersee and Ersee. In between we have some mountainous regions, Schafbergzone and Höllengebirge. You can find salt in this area. You might remember that here, for example, in Hallstatt, we know of Celtic settlements, and they already dug deep down into the mountains back then. Some more information on the climate, on the mild temperatures at the lakes. And we can see again where we find these different kinds of farms, like the Mühlviertler Dreiseithof, here in the north, the Innviertler Vierseithof to the west. And then at the center we have the Vierkantzone. So, Vierkanthöfe. And I think at this point you should be quite sleepy. And we're going to stop here for now and are going to continue with some more pages at the weekend in German. So for now, sleep well, have nice dreams, and if you're interested, maybe I'll see you again on Sunday.